Ethan stared out the window of his flat, watching the bustling streets of London pass by. At 24 years old, he was a university student navigating the complexities of modern life, but something deep within him felt increasingly unsettled. As he observed the people around him, he couldn't help but notice a pervasive sense of conformity that seemed to permeate every aspect of society. Ethan had always been a thoughtful, observant young man, and his travels to various countries for his education had only heightened his awareness of the herd mentality that gripped so many of his peers. Whether it was the way his classmates blindly followed the latest trends, the uncritical acceptance of popular opinions, or the lack of independent thinking, Ethan found himself growing more and more disillusioned with the world around him. As he sat in the quiet of his apartment, Ethan replayed a recent encounter that had crystallized his discomfort. He had been in a seminar, discussing a controversial political issue, when the professor had asked for a show of hands to gauge the class's sentiment. To Ethan's dismay, the vast majority of his peers had raised their hands in agreement, parroting the same views without any apparent consideration of alternative perspectives. Ethan's own hand had remained firmly at his side, his brow furrowed in a mix of confusion and disappointment. He had watched as the professor nodded approvingly at the class's apparent unity, seemingly oblivious to the underlying lack of critical thinking. Ethan had been tempted to raise his hand, to challenge the prevailing narrative, but the thought of standing out in a sea of conformity had filled him with a sense of trepidation. As he replayed the scene in his mind, Ethan felt a growing unease. Was he the only one who saw the troubling lack of independent thought? Were his peers truly content to simply go along with the crowd, never questioning the status quo? The more he observed the world around him, the more Ethan became convinced that something needed to change. Sighing deeply, Ethan turned his attention to the books and papers scattered across his desk. He had always been a diligent student, driven by a thirst for knowledge and a desire to understand the complexities of the world. But now, as he pored over the course materials, he found himself increasingly dissatisfied with the narrow focus and prescribed perspectives that seemed to dominate the curriculum. Ethan yearned for a more nuanced, open-minded approach to education, one that encouraged critical thinking, diverse viewpoints, and the exploration of unconventional ideas. He wanted to delve deeper into the underlying issues that shaped society, to challenge the accepted norms and uncover the hidden truths that lay beneath the surface. With a newfound sense of purpose, Ethan began to jot down his thoughts, his pen moving across the page with a sense of urgency. He knew that the path ahead would not be easy, that standing apart from the crowd would require a level of courage and determination he had not yet fully tapped into. But as he looked out the window once more, his eyes filled with a steely resolve. Ethan was done with conformity. He was done with the herd mentality that seemed to dominate his peers and the world around him. It was time to forge his own path, to find his true voice and embrace the individuality that had always been at the core of who he was. With a deep breath, Ethan closed his notebook and turned his attention to the tasks ahead. The journey of self-discovery had begun, and he was determined to see it through, no matter the cost. As Ethan's discontent with the conformity he observed in London continued to grow, he welcomed the opportunity to expand his horizons through his university's study abroad program. Eager to immerse himself in new cultures and perspectives, he set off on a journey that would take him to several countries, each offering a vastly different experience from the familiarity of his home city. Ethan's first stop was in Tokyo, Japan, where he was immediately struck by the juxtaposition of ancient traditions and modern innovations. The bustling streets, adorned with neon signs and towering skyscrapers, stood in stark contrast to the serene temples and gardens he encountered. Wandering through the vibrant neighborhoods, Ethan marveled at the way the Japanese people seemed to effortlessly blend the old and the new, respecting their heritage while embracing progress. One afternoon, Ethan stumbled upon a small bookshop tucked away on a quiet side street. Drawn by the inviting atmosphere, he stepped inside and was greeted by the owner, an elderly man with a warm smile. As they struck up a conversation, Ethan was captivated by the man's deep insights and unconventional perspectives on life. The shop owner spoke of the importance of finding one's own path, of not being beholden to societal norms or expectations. "The world is full of conformity, my friend," the man said, his eyes twinkling with wisdom. "But the true beauty lies in the unique individuals who dare to forge their own way. They are the ones who inspire and challenge us to think beyond the boundaries." Ethan listened intently, his mind racing with newfound ideas and possibilities. He had always felt a deep yearning to be more than just another face in the crowd, and now, in this unexpected encounter, he found a kindred spirit who validated his own struggles. Thanking the shop owner for his insights, Ethan left the bookshop with a renewed sense of purpose, his desire for individuality burning brighter than ever before. The next leg of Ethan's journey took him to the vibrant city of Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Here, he was immersed in a culture that celebrated diversity and self-expression in a way he had never experienced. From the vibrant street art that adorned the walls to the infectious rhythms of samba music, Ethan felt a sense of liberation and joy that was strikingly different from the reserved atmosphere he had grown accustomed to in London. During his time in Rio, Ethan had the opportunity to attend a local university event focused on social and political activism. Surrounded by a diverse group of students and community leaders, he listened with rapt attention as they discussed the importance of challenging the status quo and fighting for the rights of marginalized groups. Ethan was particularly captivated by the passion and conviction of a young woman named Mariana, who spoke eloquently about the power of individuality and the need to resist conformity. "We are told that to succeed, we must fit into a certain mold," Mariana declared, her eyes alight with fierce determination. "But true progress and change come from those who dare to think differently, to break free from the constraints of societal expectations." Ethan found himself nodding in agreement, his own frustrations with the conformity he had witnessed in London resonating deeply with Mariana's words. As the event drew to a close, he approached her and struck up a conversation, eager to learn more about her perspective and the work she was doing within her community. Over the course of the next few days, Ethan and Mariana developed a fast friendship, bonding over their shared desire to forge their own paths and challenge the societal norms that had long held them back. Ethan felt a sense of kinship with this vibrant, unconventional woman, and her unwavering commitment to individuality and social justice inspired him to reflect more deeply on his own journey of self-discovery. As Ethan's travels continued, taking him to other countries and exposing him to even more diverse cultures and perspectives, his hunger for independence and self-expression only grew stronger. He found himself drawn to the unique individuals he encountered, the artists, the activists, the freethinkers, who dared to defy convention and carve out their own unique identities. With each new experience, Ethan's resolve to break free from the constraints of conformity became increasingly resolute. Back in London, Ethan's classmates and peers continued to follow the well-trodden paths laid out before them, content to blend in with the crowd. But Ethan could no longer ignore the persistent voice within him, the one that yearned to forge his own way, regardless of the challenges that might lie ahead. He knew that the road to true individuality would not be an easy one, but the more he immersed himself in the stories and perspectives of those who had chosen to walk that path, the more determined he became to embark on his own journey of self-discovery. As Ethan's travels broadened his horizons, exposing him to diverse cultures and perspectives, the contrast between his newfound openness and the conformity he witnessed back home in London only grew more stark. Upon returning from his latest overseas adventure, he found himself increasingly at odds with the herd mentality that seemed to permeate every aspect of his life. His family, long accustomed to Ethan's introspective nature, began voicing their concerns. "You're falling behind, Ethan," his father would say. "It's time you started thinking about a proper career path, like the rest of your peers." His mother would chime in, urging him to focus on his studies and stop wasting time with his unconventional interests. Even his closest friends, who had once shared his thirst for exploration and self-discovery, now seemed content to simply go with the flow. They spoke endlessly of securing internships, networking, and planning their post-graduation trajectories, a script Ethan struggled to follow. "Why does everything have to be about climbing the ladder and fitting in?" he would often wonder, as his peers discussed the latest trends and the newest must-have gadgets. Ethan found himself increasingly at a loss, unable to relate to the singular focus on material success and social status that consumed those around him. One particularly disheartening moment came when Ethan attempted to share his newfound passion for philosophy with a group of classmates. As he eloquently expounded on the teachings of Kierkegaard and the importance of authentic individuality, he was met with blank stares and dismissive chuckles. "Leave it to Ethan to get all deep and existential," one of his peers scoffed. "Why can't you just enjoy the simple things like the rest of us?" Ethan felt the sting of isolation as he watched his friends retreat back into the comfortable embrace of conformity. He longed to connect with someone who shared his yearning for self-discovery and his refusal to simply fall in line. Retreating to the solace of his journal, Ethan poured out his frustrations, wrestling with the pressure he faced to conform. "Why is it so hard for people to see the value in being true to oneself?" he wrote, his pen moving furiously across the page. "This herd mentality, it stifles the very essence of what it means to be human." As the weeks passed, Ethan found himself withdrawing further from his social circles, opting instead to immerse himself in the works of great thinkers and philosophers. He spent hours in the library, studying the writings of Nietzsche, Sartre, and Camus, seeking solace and validation in their exploration of individualism and the human condition. Yet, even in this solitary pursuit, Ethan could not escape the nagging sense that he was somehow failing to live up to the expectations of others. His family's concerned inquiries about his academic performance and career plans weighed heavily on him, and he found himself torn between his desire for authenticity and the fear of disappointing those he loved. One evening, as Ethan sat alone in his flat, nursing a cup of Earl Grey tea, he was struck by a realization. "I'm not the one who's lost," he murmured to himself. "It's the rest of the world that's lost, trapped in a cycle of conformity and complacency." With a newfound sense of purpose, Ethan began to actively challenge the status quo, engaging in lively debates with professors and classmates, unafraid to voice his unconventional perspectives. He embraced his passion for the arts, spending countless hours painting and writing, and even started a small reading group dedicated to exploring the literature of nonconformity. Despite the resistance and skepticism he encountered, Ethan refused to back down. He knew that the path he had chosen would not be an easy one, but he was more determined than ever to forge his own way, even if it meant standing alone. As the semester drew to a close, Ethan found himself at a crossroads. The pressure to conform had never been more intense, with professors and peers alike urging him to reconsider his unorthodox choices and get serious about his future. But deep within, Ethan knew that the only future worth pursuing was the one that aligned with his true self. With a deep breath, he steeled his resolve, ready to take the next step in his journey of self-discovery, no matter the cost. For Ethan, the pursuit of individuality had become a sacred calling, and he would not be deterred, even as the weight of societal expectations threatened to pull him back into the herd. Ethan's heart raced as he sat in his small apartment, staring at the blank canvas before him. For years, he had suppressed his creative impulses, burying them beneath the weight of societal expectations and the relentless demands of his coursework. But now, something inside him had shifted. The travels he had undertaken, the diverse cultures he had immersed himself in, had awakened a dormant part of his soul. Ethan could no longer ignore the burning desire to express himself, to forge his own path, even if it meant breaking free from the mold that society had tried to cast him in. With a deep breath, Ethan picked up a paintbrush and began to move it across the canvas, his strokes bold and unrestrained. Colors blended and clashed, forming shapes and patterns that defied convention. It was as if he were channeling the very essence of his individuality, pouring it onto the canvas in a defiant act of self-expression. As the painting took shape, Ethan felt a surge of empowerment. This was his creation, his voice, untethered from the expectations of others. He knew that the path he was choosing would not be an easy one, but in this moment, he was consumed by a sense of purpose and clarity. Stepping back, Ethan surveyed his work, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. This was just the beginning, he realized. The first step on a journey of self-discovery that would undoubtedly be fraught with challenges and opposition. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity as Ethan immersed himself in his newfound passion for painting. He spent countless hours in his apartment, experimenting with different techniques and materials, each work a reflection of his evolving sense of self. Ethan's friends and family, however, were less than enthusiastic about his artistic pursuits. They questioned his decision to deviate from the traditional academic path, urging him to focus on his studies and secure a respectable career. "Art? But what will you do with that?" his mother would ask, her brow furrowed with concern. "You should be focusing on your law degree, not wasting time with frivolous hobbies." Ethan listened to their concerns, but he could not ignore the fire that burned within him. He knew that this path would not be easy, but he was determined to forge ahead, regardless of the obstacles that stood in his way. One day, while walking through a local art gallery, Ethan stumbled upon an exhibition showcasing the work of emerging artists. Drawn in by the vibrant colors and bold strokes, he found himself captivated by the raw, unapologetic expression of the pieces on display. Ethan spent hours immersed in the gallery, his eyes drinking in every detail, his mind racing with new ideas and inspiration. It was then that he made a decision. He would submit his own work to the gallery, taking a leap of faith and putting his individualism on full display. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of nerves and anticipation as Ethan prepared his submission. He meticulously selected his strongest paintings, crafting an artist's statement that captured the essence of his creative journey. When the day of the exhibition opening arrived, Ethan found himself standing before his own work, a mix of pride and trepidation coursing through his veins. As visitors began to filter through the gallery, he watched anxiously, waiting for their reactions. To his surprise and delight, the response was overwhelmingly positive. People were drawn to the rawness and authenticity of his paintings, marveling at the way he had managed to capture the struggle and triumph of individuality. Ethan could hardly contain his excitement as he listened to the murmurs of praise, his heart swelling with a sense of validation and belonging. For the first time in his life, he felt truly seen and understood, not as a cog in the societal machine, but as a unique and valuable individual. As the night wore on, Ethan found himself engaged in deep conversations with fellow artists and art enthusiasts, each exchange further fueling his passion and determination. He had taken a leap of faith, and it had paid off, reaffirming his belief in the power of individuality and self-expression. But with this newfound success came a new challenge. Ethan knew that the road ahead would not be an easy one, as he continued to navigate the tension between his desire for individuality and the pressure to conform. The rejection and opposition he had faced from his family and friends had only made him more resolute, but he also recognized the sacrifices he might have to make to stay true to himself. As he made his way home, Ethan couldn't help but feel a sense of both exhilaration and trepidation. He had taken the first steps on his journey of self-discovery, but the path ahead was still uncertain. Yet, with each brush stroke, with each act of defiance against the status quo, Ethan felt more alive and empowered than ever before. Ethan stood at a crossroads, the weight of his decision heavy on his shoulders. The path forward was no longer clear, as the consequences of his choices loomed large. After years of carefully carving his own way, rejecting the conformity that had once suffocated him, he now faced a pivotal moment that would determine the course of his future. On one side, the familiar and comfortable route, the path his family and peers expected him to take. It promised security, acceptance, and a sense of belonging that had long eluded him. All he had to do was fall back in line, suppress the yearnings of his soul, and assume the role society had carved out for him. But the other path, the one that called to the very core of his being, was fraught with uncertainty and the risk of isolation. It meant continuing his pursuit of individualism, no matter the cost. Ethan had tasted the exhilaration of breaking free, of forging his own identity, and he knew he could never truly be content by succumbing to the pressure to conform. As he stood at the metaphorical crossroads, memories of his journey flooded his mind. The disillusionment he'd felt witnessing the herd mentality that had once consumed him, the transformative experiences of his travels, the internal struggle to reconcile his inner voice with societal expectations, it all led him to this moment. Ethan closed his eyes, reflecting on the sacrifices he had already made, the challenges he had overcome, and the personal growth he had achieved. He thought of the allies he had found, the kindred spirits who had supported his quest for individuality, and the sense of purpose that had blossomed within him. Abandoning that now would feel like a betrayal of his very self. But the alternative was not without its own risks. Continuing down the path of nonconformity would undoubtedly bring more obstacles, more opposition, and the potential for greater isolation. His family, friends, and even his peers might turn their backs on him, severing the connections he had once taken for granted. Ethan's heart raced as he weighed the consequences of each choice. On one hand, the security and acceptance of the familiar path. On the other, the exhilaration and fulfillment of embracing his individualism, no matter the cost. It was a decision that would shape the rest of his life, a crossroads that would test the very essence of who he was. As the seconds ticked by, Ethan could feel the weight of the decision bearing down on him. This was no longer just about his own personal journey. It was about the courage to stand up for his beliefs, to defy the expectations of those around him, and to forge his own unique path, even if it meant walking alone. Steeling himself, Ethan opened his eyes, his gaze resolute. He knew what he had to do. Taking a deep breath, he stepped forward, committing himself to the path of the individualist, come what may.